And welcome back to Municipal Matters here on TV Cogeco. I'm your host, Dave Glover, and joining me now is Andy Oliver, the Vice President of Fuel Services for Cameco. Welcome, Andy. Nice to see you again.
Well, good to be here.
Last time I had you on the show was controversial time. We were talking about the newspaper story that was in the Globe and Mail, and we had a whole group of folks on and the whole forum. So that was a while ago. I guess we're talking about 2010 at this point. What's happening with that? I guess we'll start off with that and find out what's going on.
Okay, well that's our project to really rejuvenate the site, to clean it up, to deal with the old buildings and contaminated soil on the site, and also take advantage of working with the Port Hope Area Initiative as they remove other contaminated materials from around the town.
Now, have you received any federal dollars to help offset some of the costs of this burden? I mean, we should probably give a brief history of the facility. I mean, most people aren't aware of it, but I mean, it was El Dorado. It was run by the federal government, and I mean, they left quite a mess behind when you guys took over. I mean, it was like.
Well, yes, when Cameco took over in 1988, there was quite an issue there, and by and large, the theme behind the formation of Cameco was that the federal government would take responsibility for the historic materials that were of no future value. So there is some contribution through the federal government in that sense. The exact determination of the boundaries of that help is still under some discussion.
They're still trying to weasel out of it, aren't they? Federal government, tax dollars, it's like, I
think we just need clarity in terms of the contractual arrangements that were set up at that time.
Well, and I guess once they've got the black and whites out of the way, and it's like, okay, this is clearly what we have to, this is our responsibility, this is what we have to pay for. And I guess that's what needs to be cleared up, I guess.
Well, that's right. We need to walk through that. But, I mean, there will be some responsibility taken by the federal government, which is helpful to the process, because obviously it is an expensive project overall.
It is indeed. And I mean, let's look at the ramifications if Cameco hadn't come on the scene in 1988. I mean, we'd probably be looking at just a huge mess down there in Port Hope, probably no different than the Sydney tar ponds in Nova Scotia, right?
Well, I mean, it's a significant area that needs to be improved. But I mean, there still will be always a plant operating there, and while the plant's there will be some level of contamination, but most of it can be dealt with through the Vision 2010. So we're very happy to move ahead with that.
Well, let's talk about the specifics of 2010. Obviously, you're running. It's running a little behind schedule because 2010 is next year.
Yeah, well, that's right. I mean, it's the regulatory process that really takes the time. We had to kind of get it into the pipeline for the regulators to look at that, and then they had to make a determination of what route the assessment should be. The CNSC made a recommendation last December that the process would be by a so-called comprehensive study approach to the environmental assessment, but that still needed to be approved by the Minister of Environment. That approval was recently obtained, so we now know that we are on a comprehensive study track, and we'll be moving forward with doing the environmental assessment and producing the reports that are necessary to verify that there will be no significant negative impact on the environment by this project.
Now, is there a huge difference between what would be a standard environmental assessment and what would be a more comprehensive assessment?
Well, the most conventional or most common form of assessment is so-called screening report, and the comprehensive study report does not differ very greatly from that. There are some features, perhaps most significantly to many, is that there is some funding for outside interveners through the comprehensive study route, which is not available in the regular screening route.
Now, this funding you're talking about, would that be the three groups, the FAIR, the Lake Ontario Waterkeepers, and the Port Hope Community Health Concerns Committee?
That's correct. Those have been assigned certain sums of money by the federal government to help them get expert opinion to address the areas which they have most concern about, and then feed that information they gather into the environmental assessment process to make sure it's fully taken into account.
I just want to remind the viewers we're watching Municipal Matters here on TV Cogeco. I'm your host, Dave Glover, and joining me is Andy Oliver, the Vice President of Fuel Services for Cameco Industries. I hope that's correct, right?
Well, Cameco Corporation, yes.
Close enough, I hope. Jeez.
Right.
Now, just prior to Christmas, there were a number of layoffs announced, and that was due to a contract problem that you have with one of your suppliers, I understand, in the U.S. Now, there was a story in today's Northumberland Today outlining the fact that some of those workers will be coming back.
Yeah, so that was always the plan. I mean, the issue for us that was while we were shut down for about a year, the supplier of this material, this hydrofluoric acid that we use as a feed material to make our uranium hexafluoride, decided that their contract was no longer valid. We're still in legal dispute over that matter, but it meant we weren't getting the hydrofluoric acid delivered according to the contract. We then looked around to see how else we could get this material, and unfortunately it was just at a time when commodity prices were very high. The price was extremely high. It was just, it actually didn't make the business viable the way it was sitting. So we had to look further afield, particularly looking in Europe, to look at hydrofluoric acid in terms of supply there. And certainly the prices there were more reasonable. And actually, as we have taken time to negotiate a new contract, the prices have been coming down again as many commodities have been coming down. So although we haven't got a new contract in place, we expect to have one soon. And so it was really the time taken for negotiating the new contract meant that we really couldn't afford to operate the plant. And although we had the intent to do so as soon as we have a new supply secured. So now we have the plan in place very clearly that we will be making uranium hexafluoride in the second half of this year, and so we'll need to bring those who are laid off will be brought back to get the plant back into production. We hope towards the end of the second quarter.
Well, let's talk about the Welcome Waste site. Can we get a little history on the Welcome Waste site, first of all? So
well, it has quite a long history. It actually was in operation. It's opened up in 1948 and was taking the very old waste from the operations at that time, which was even before there was a modern uranium refinery there. It was more in the days of the radium processing. And also it was a time when they collected some of the worst contaminated soils and materials from around the town and took them out there. So it was the first sort of out-of-town facility. But it was only opened up in 1948 and it closed in 1955. So it only took the waste for a short period of time. Since that time of 1955, it's been, well, the waste has been there, not in the most stable configuration because groundwater was leaching through it. It needed to be collected and treated, which is what the treatment facility is on site, and now treated water is pumped from that facility to Lake Ontario.
Okay, well, recently there were some concerns, obviously the FAIR group, they probably raised those concerns directly to Cameco regarding toxic chemicals leaching into Lake Ontario due to a broken pipe at the facility. Is that still the case?
Well, let's clarify what the pipe is. The pipe is this discharge of water, about a 3-inch pipe that goes down to the lake from the site. It's of treated water, and the water that goes into the lake there has always passed every toxicity test that's been applied to it. So it's not exactly the quality of the Lake Ontario water, but it meets all standards and is non-toxic. However, the issue was that by history it had been buried in the beach and it had gone out underwater so nobody saw it. And what had happened is the beach movement had broken the pipe and pushed it up so you could see the discharge.
I see.
And that was certainly disturbing to some individuals.
So it was just a bad optic, is what you're telling me.
Principally, yes. There was no real hazard to the environment by that happening, but it was a bad optic, and so we have corrected that situation, and the pipe is now reburied with some large concrete slabs and a steel pipe. So we hope that will stay in place. But during the winter months and severe storms, it is quite a challenge to have a pipe remain in place at the beach.
Now that's got to be one of the toughest things to deal with, I guess, in your business is the possibility of something popping up and just creating a bad visual for the company as a whole, really, isn't it?
Well, things are very easily taken out of context. So we have then to work hard to put them back into context, and that's exactly what I'm doing tonight.